Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's start our Tuesday Uddhava Gita with some prayers first. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. Om Bhur Bhuvaswa, Tatsavitra Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat. Asto ma satyamya tamso ma jyotirgamya mrityorma amritam gamya. Om Sehna Bhavatu Sehna Bhunaktu Sehviryam Karvavai Tejasvi Navadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, Uddhava Gita, the books we are studying from, page number 135. This is a chapter 4. We're going to start with the verse number 25, which says, Istribhi kamagyanena kinkni jal malina kridana na vedatma patam sura krideshu nirvrita. In the company of celestial women, the enjoyer of the results of sacrifice travels to heavenly gardens in a wonderful aeroplane, which is decorated with circles of tinkling bells and which moves according to his desire. Being relaxed, comfortable, and happy in heavenly pleasure gardens, he does not consider that he is exhausting the results of his previously acquired piety and will soon fall down to the mortal world. So over here, Lord Krishna is talking to Uddhava, his devotee, his friend, and telling him that good deeds, sure, they'll take you to a better place, like a heavenly abode, but still, it's temporary. After exhausting those karmas, you'll have to come back as a human being, because moksha is the ultimate goal, and that can be attained only from a human life. So the phrase Kam Yan means traveling at will in his celestial airplane. Okay? We read about these kind of celestial planes in the Ramayana also, in the Puranas also. So all our scriptures, they talk about these celestial planes. So let's look at verse number 26. Tavat samodate swarge yavat punyam samapyate kashin punya patyehe arvag anichan kal chalita. For as long as his pious merit remains, the performer of sacrifice enjoys life in the heavenly planets. When his pious merit is exhausted, however, he falls down from the pleasure gardens of heaven, being moved against his will by the force of eternal time. Because nobody wants to come out of that heavenly plane. But if the time is over, got to come out. So that's what he means over here. That when his pious merit is exhausted, he falls down from the pleasure gardens of heaven, being moved against his will. It's almost like a little child who wants to keep on playing with his toys or the video games. So this is how we are too. So by the force of eternal time. So being driven by time, one again falls down to this planet of birth and death. So this sansar. Now next three verses, 27, 28 and 29, they are grouped together. So 27 says, Yada adharam rataha sangad asantav vajitendriya kamatmaha kripno lubda istreno bhut vihansakaha. 28. Pashun avidhi na labhye pret bhut ganan yajan narkan avshoho jantur gatvaha yate utbanam tama. And verse number 29. Karmani dukho darkane kurvan dehen te puna deham abhajte tatra kim sukham mritye dharminaha. So if a person engages in sinful activities, either due to bad association or his unwillingness to control his senses, he will certainly become mad due to having desires that are impossible to fulfill. Such a person hardly cares for others, is very greedy, and always seeking the opportunity to enjoy the bodies of women. When the mind is contaminated in this way, one does not hesitate to commit violence, and thus he slaughters poor animals for the satisfaction of the tongue. Sometimes worshipping ghosts and spirits, such a bewildered person is not better than an animal, and after death he goes to hell, which is a manifestation of the darkest mode of material nature. Receiving a hellish body, he continues to perform horrible activities that ensure his future misery. What happiness can there be for one who engages in activities that culminate in death? See, he mentioned in the beginning the bad association, kusanga. So we got to be very careful the company we keep. And the second thing he said, unwillingness to control our senses. Okay, so these senses are very powerful. So we got to learn how to control them. And then we got to keep good company also. Otherwise, these forces are so strong. Even if we don't want to do something bad, we end up doing something bad. And once we have done something bad, the consequences are there. Often we just open our eyes at the time of the consequences. Why this happened? Why is it happening? We got to live a life where when we are making the decision, keeping in mind that, hey, there is a consequence. Be aware. There are two classes of those who perform karam, the pious and the impious. After describing the destination of pious persons, because previously that's what he was saying, the good karmas, they will take us to heaven. Now he's talking about the second kind. The destination of impious person is now being described. One who is not self-controlled is certainly lusty, and such a person afflicted by lust becomes very miserly. Such a greedy person who is overwhelmed by the thirst for material enjoyment becomes henpecked. Due to being addicted to enjoying sex with women, he performs animal sacrifices that are opposed to the principles of religion to fulfill his insatiable desires. The phrase ulban vanitamaha refers to the non-moving living entities, such as trees. Such persons who are engaged in fruitive activities never achieve tangible happiness. This is the conclusion of these verses. So all these three verses very strongly telling us to stay away from the bad company and control your desires. Impious people engage in irreligious activities, becoming addicted to sinful activities. They are intemperate, lusty, miserly, greedy, henpecked, and violent, either due to the association of other sinful people or due to being unable to control their senses. Such impious persons indulge in unrestricted sexual enjoyment, slaughter countless animals for the satisfaction of their tongues, and try to forget their miseries by means of intoxication. In this way, they transgress all prescribed rules and regulations. Eventually, such persons become influenced by ghosts and spirits who deprive them of all ability to discriminate between right and wrong. Losing all sense of decency, they become fit candidates for entrance into the darker modes of material existence. Those who are ignorant of the glories of devotional service engage in fruitive activities with a desire to enjoy the flickering pleasures of sense gratification. As a result, when their duration of life comes to an end, they are transferred to another body to enjoy or suffer the results of their past fruitive activities. Considering all this, one should never aspire for material happiness. Material life is so horrible because no matter what one's duration of life might be, one will still always be afflicted with the fear of death. Even Brahma is afraid of death. And so, what to speak of us who live for more than 100 years? Considering this, what possible happiness can there be for the conditioned souls? So, verse number 30. Lokanam lokam palanam mat bhayam kalp jivinam brahmano api bhayam mato dvi pararth prayusha. In all the planetary systems, from the heavenly planets down to the hellish planets, even the demigods who live for 1000 yuga circles, and even Brahma who lives for 2 praraths are afraid of me in my form of time. That means the Kal, afraid of the Kal. One may imagine that the heavenly planets and pleasures experienced there are eternal, but this is being refuted in this verse. Neither the heavenly planets nor its rulers are eternal. Even Brahma is afraid of the Supreme Lord. This is stated in the Vedas. It is out of the fear of Supreme Brahma that the wind is blowing, out of fear of him that the sun regularly rises and sets, and out of fear of him that fire acts. It is only due to fear of him that Death and Indra, the king of heaven, perform their respective duties. This we learned when we were studying Taittiriya Upanishad. From this statement, the supreme authority of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is clearly established. And the belief that Brahma is the Supreme Person is refuted. Okay, so Brahma is the Supreme. Brahma is just a power of a Brahma which has a life duration. Okay, verse number 31. Guna srijati karmani cha guna no srijate gunana jivas to gun sanyukta ho bhungte karam fal anye asam. It is the material senses that perform pious and sinful activities. It is the 3 modes of material nature See, those are the gunas, three modes of material nature that inspire the senses to engage in fruitive activities. And it is the living entity who enjoys the fruit of his karma with the help of his senses. So the whole diagram is given over here. You got to just remember it. It was previously described how sinful living entities are degraded to a hellish condition of life. Now the question may arise as to whether the living entities are helpless or are they the master of their own destiny. The answer is that it is the senses that worship the demigod and perform other ritualistic activities. It is the senses that enjoy intimate association with another's wife and perform other abominable acts, thus creating the destiny of the living entity. It is due to being impelled by the three modes of material nature that the senses create one's future body. The minute independence of the living entity consists of how he chooses to associate with the modes of nature. Chooses. See, that freedom God has given it to us. But we forget that we have that freedom. So chooses. It is in this way that the living entity experiences suffering or enjoyment of his pious and sinful acts. According to the Bhagavad Gita, one's activities are impelled by the three modes of material nature. And we are all familiar with those modes of nature, Satvikta, Rajasikta, and Tamsikta. As long as one thinks himself to be the doer of activities, he remains on the platform of false ego. That is a Khetarpal. Until one comes to the platform of self-realization, he continues to experience lamentation and illusion. The conditioned soul can be liberated if he gives up his separatist mentality and engages in the devotional service of the Lord. When one is under the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is removed from the disturbing influence of the external energy of the Lord. By the perfection of devotional service to the Lord, one realizes his original identity of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. That is like a Sat Chit Ananda. So that he goes to reside in Vaikuntha, the eternal abode of the Lord. So when the Vaikuntha word is used, that really means another term for eternal abode. You can call it a moksha or nirvana. So Vaikuntha. Verse number 32. Yavat syad gun vaishmaya tavan nanatva atmanaha nanatvam atmano yavat partantre tadevahi. As long as the living entity remains under the control of the three modes of material nature, he will attain various forms of life. So that means we'll just keep coming back according to our own karmas in different forms. Sometimes human form, sometimes it could be animal form, plant form, or even a devata's form, depending upon our karmas. Such as a demigod, animal, and so on. As long as the living entity remains in the bodily concept of life, thinking himself to be the doer, he will have to experience the good and bad results of his karma. So very clearly, even the good karmas cannot liberate us. So good karmas we must do, but remembering who is doing it and for whom we are doing it. So he's not saying that we should not do good karmas, but that I am doing it, that notion has to go away. Because Atma is not doing anything and I am the Atma. Because otherwise, the good karmas, the result of the good karmas are almost like a golden chain. And we can be bound by the golden chain also. And the fruit of the bad karmas will be a chain which has thorns on it. That's more hurtful. But still it is a bondage. Both are bondage. So that's what he is telling us, is just very clearly, directly telling us that when the living entity is forgetful of his relationship with Krishna, he considers this material world as ultimate reality. Thus he wanders among various species of life, sometimes as a hog, sometimes as a bird, and sometimes as a demigod. Okay, so we can become devatas also, we can become animals also, we can come back as human beings also. So this time around, we have come as a human being. So we should not lose this great opportunity to move up. While considering himself to be the doer of activities, the conditioned soul continues to wander through varieties of material bodies, one after another. In such a condition of life, one is incapable of understanding that behind this temporary manifestation is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Unless one is situated in his constitutional position as the eternal servant of the Lord, one will remain falsely proud of being the proprietor of all his service and the performer of heroic activities. In the human form of life, the conditioned soul may begin to worship 5 demigods for the fulfillment of his material desires. In such a situation, one thinks of the material world, which is a creation of the Lord's external energy, as being an object of his enjoyment. So then we just get attached to it. So these senses, these 5 demigods in our body are the 5 senses. We just want to appease those. If that is the goal for us, then we are definitely get more and more entrapped. That's what he's telling us. Verse number 33. Yavad asyaha savtantratvam tavat ishvarato bhayam ya etat sam upasirasta te muhyanti shucharpatah. As long as the living entities remain dependent upon fruitive activities under the control of the modes of nature, they will continue to fear, because I am the giver of the results of karma. So fear is over here. Oh, what will happen? Will I get what I want? Those who accept the material concept of life, taking this cosmic manifestation to be factual, will devote themselves to material enjoyment and therefore remain absorbed in lamentation and illusion. Because no material enjoyment can satisfy us completely. So that's why he said lamentation and illusion. We want more and more and more. It's almost like the more fuel you put into the fire, the more it blazes higher. So this is what happens to our own hunger too. So here the Supreme Lord chastises those who say that the path of material enjoyment is auspicious. Those who praise the performance of fruitive activities are themselves tormented by lamentation and illusion. The living entity is trapped in a network of illusion. Even if he can understand that he is dependent upon someone superior, he is not inclined to serve the Supreme Lord, This causes him to suffer in so many ways. However, dreaming of sense gratification, the conditioned soul always fears the destruction of the arrangements he has so carefully made. Simply engaged in trying to perfect his eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, and thus exploiting material nature, he glides down to the lower species of life. Maya has two potencies, the covering potency and the throwing potency. When one is covered by Maya, he forgets his original consciousness. Okay, so this is called avarna, covering. We forget who we are with this covering, so that she throws him into the darkness of ignorance. When one foolishly thinks that he is independent of the Supreme Lord, he becomes enamored by temporary material objects, hoping to enjoy sense gratification. The result is that when a person grows older, his life becomes filled with fear and anxiety. A conditioned soul falsely considers himself to be in control of his life, but because he is not in control, he is forced to suffer against his will. Truthfully, material life is abominable. It is only due to illusion that we think it is to be satisfactory. Verse number 34. काल आत्मगमोह लोकः स्वभावो धर्म एव च इति माम बहुधा प्रारु guna vyati kare sati. Due to the interaction of the three modes of material nature, the conditioned souls described me in various ways as the time, the soul, the religious principles, the universal form, one's own nature, and so on. See, Kal, Atma, Loka, Swabhav, Dharma. So that's how sometimes we describe this ultimate truth. So that's why he said that due to interaction of three modes of material nature. So according to some opinion, the material nature, time, the scriptures, and the soul are eternal. The word Swabhav means nature, which is attributed to a conditioned soul. When the three modes of material nature cover the intelligence of the living entity, he considers the form of the Lord as a creation of Maya Shakti. This misconception can be removed by the will of the Lord, and thus everyone should arrive to get freed from the bondage of karma and engage in the devotional service of the Lord. When the intelligence of the conditioned soul is covered by the external energy of the Lord, he forgets the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In such a condition, some people refer to him as time, some refers to him as the Vedic literature, some refer to him as nature, some refer to him as religious principles. In this way, various fragmental understandings of the principles of the Lord are understood. Okay, he is all of it and more. Number 35. Now, Uddhava is saying this. So that's why he says, Shri Uddhav Uvacha. Guneshu Vartmanoh api deh jeshva anupavritaha guner na badhyate dehi badhyate va katham vibho. Shri Uddhav said, my dear Lord, the souls of the world are conditioned by the three modes of material nature, and thus they experience the happiness and distress that results from the activities performed under their direction. How can the conditioned souls be considered as independent? Because we often wonder, see, we hear that we are free to do, But this is a question he is asking, and sometimes we wonder too, are we really truly free? One can argue that the living entity is spiritual in nature and thus has nothing to do with this material world. If this is the fact, then how has he become bound up by the nature? If it was all free, always free, why did it get bound? We should reflect upon this too. If I am the Atma, the soul, part of Paramatma, why did I start thinking that I'm just a body, a limited body? It appears to ordinary people that even liberated souls also eat, sleep, walk, talk, and perform other similar activities, just as they do. Considering this, how can it be said that a liberated soul is not bound by his gross and subtle bodies, which act under the direction of the three modes of material nature? It may be questioned that if the soul is like the sky, in that it never mixes with anything, then how it became conditioned by material nature? Uddhava presents such arguments just to clear up the understanding of actual spiritual life. Conditioned souls under the influence of the three modes of material nature describe the absolute truth as non-existent or as possessing material qualities, or as being devoid of all qualities, or as being a neuter object like a eunuch. How can a spirit soul, who is now conditioned by the modes of nature, be freed from the bodily concept of life? If the transcendental spirit soul is never actually touched by Maya, then why is he referred to as conditioned? Because often we hear that conditioned soul, or Jivatma. Last two verses are together, 36 and 37 of this chapter. And this is also from Uddhava. Katham vartet viharet kair na gyayet lakshnai kim bhunjitot visrijyeh chayota sit yati va etat achyut me bruhi prashnam prashan vidam var nitye badho nitye mukt ek ave eti me brahma. Oh Achyut, see Achyut is the word used for Lord Krishna. The living entity is sometimes described as eternally conditioned and as other times as eternally liberated. Because of this, I am not able to understand the actual situation of the living entity. My Lord, you are the best of those who are expert in answering philosophical questions. Please explain to me the symptoms by which one can tell the difference between a living entity who is eternally liberated and one who is eternally conditioned. In what ways are they situated? And how do they enjoy life, eat, evacuate, lie down, sit, and move about? Uddhav said, as long as the living entities identify themselves as products of matter, they continue to remain conditioned by the illusory energy. As soon as they are free from this misconception, they become liberated from material bondage. If this is a fact, then how can I recognize who is liberated and who is conditioned? Uddhav goes on to say, both liberated and conditioned souls eat, pass stool and urine, sleep, sit, walk, and talk. How can I recognize who is performing these activities under the direction of the modes of nature and who is acting free from Maya's influence? If you remember, Arjuna asked a similar question, that how can we recognize who's a yogi? So this free or liberated is a yogi. Okay. Personalities like Dattatreya and Bharat were eternally liberated souls, whereas Devadatta and Yagadatta were eternally conditioned souls. Since their bodies' activities appear similar, I am confused, being unable to differentiate between them. Therefore, please tell me how one can recognize an eternally conditioned soul and an eternally liberated soul. So now he gives a couple of verses over here, that it is the living entity's constitutional position to be an eternal servant of Krishna, because he is the marginal energy of Krishna and a manifestation simultaneously one with the different from the Lord. By forgetting Krishna, the living entity has become materialistic since time immemorial. Therefore, the illusory energy of Krishna is giving him different types of miseries in material existence. Conditional and liberated, both these states are adjectives. These two natures, when seen from two different angles, are known by two different names. According to the difference in the propensity of service, the conditioned and liberated states are ascertained. When one is manifested, the other disappears. So this is the end of this chapter, and we'll see the answer to Uddhav's question in the next chapter. Because this was, so we did not get an answer from Lord Krishna in this chapter. So just only a question. Okay. So chapter 5, there is a summary. Let's read that and we'll see Lord Krishna's answer next week from verse number 1. So the symptoms of conditioned and liberated living entities. So this is the title of this chapter 5. In this chapter, Lord Shri Krishna describes to Uddhava the difference between conditioned and liberated living entities, the characteristics of a saintly person, and the various limbs of devotional service. In the previous chapter, Uddhava had inquired about the difference between the conditioned and the liberated souls. In his reply, the supremely cognizant Shri Krishna states that although the spirit soul is his part and parcel, on account of his infinitesimal nature, he comes in contact with the material energy, which causes him to accept covering designations of the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. The Sattvikta, Rajsikta, Tamsikta. Thus, he has been bound up since time immemorial. But when the spirit soul cultivates a spiritual knowledge and achieves the shelter of devotional service, he becomes designated as eternally liberated. Therefore, transcendental knowledge is the cause of the living entity's liberation, and ignorance is the cause of the bondage. So with ignorance, we get bound, that knowledge, we get liberated. Both knowledge and ignorance are products of the illusory energy of Lord Krishna, and thus are his eternal potencies. The living entities who are captivated by the three modes of material nature are bewildered by false ego, which causes them to see themselves as the enjoyer of miseries, illusion, happiness, distress, danger, and so on. They thus remain absorbed in thoughts of such things, although they have no existence in the spiritual world. Both the individual spirit soul and the super soul reside within the same body. The difference between the two is that the super soul, being fully cognizant, does not indulge in enjoying the fruits of actions, but rather remains as a witness. This is exactly what we are learning in our Thursday's class in that Mundaka Upanishad. Over there, the Rishi is telling us there are two birds. One is busy pecking on the fruits, the other is only watching. So the liberated soul in us is only watching. When we identify with that, then we are liberated. But when we identify with that bird who is just enjoying the fruits, and sometimes the fruits are sweet, sometimes they are bitter. That is a bondaged identity. Whereas the infinite conditioned soul, being ignorant, suffers the consequences of his own actions. The liberated soul, in spite of being within a material body, because of the remaining reactions of his past activities, does not become disturbed by the happiness and suffering of the body. Okay? So clearly it's said that the physical body may look the same. It will look the same. All human beings, practically, they are the similar looking. With the 5 action organs, 5 sense organs, mind, intellect, ego. But the liberated one is internally different. He sees such bodily experiences in the same way that a person who has just awakened from a dream sees his dream experiences. On the other hand, a conditioned soul who actually has nothing to do with bodily happiness and distress nevertheless imagines himself the enjoyer of his bodily experiences, just as a dreaming person imagines his dream experiences to be real. Just as the sun reflected in water is not bound up by the water, and just as the air is not confined to some particular segment of the sky, a detached person takes advantage of his broad vision of the world to cut off all his doubts with the sword of proper renunciation. Okay? So again in Bhagavad Gita we learned that. It's like this is a weapon to cut off the Maya, the illusion, which is made out of vairagya, detachment. Since his life force, senses, mind, and intelligence have no tendency to become fixed on sense objects, he remains liberated even while situated within the material body. Regardless of whether he is harassed or worshipped, he remains equipoised. He is therefore considered liberated even in this life. And there's a term for it, Jivan Mukta. So he is living like us, but he's free. A liberated person has nothing to do with the piety and sin of this world, but rather sees everything equally. And what is the term for that? Samdarshana. A self-satisfied sage does not praise or condemn anyone. He does not speak uselessly to anyone and does not fix his mind on material things. Rather, he is always absorbed in meditation upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, so that in the eyes of fools he seems to be a speechless, crazy person. Even if one has studied and has been taught all the Vedic literature, if he has not developed a taste for the devotional service of the Supreme Lord, he has accomplished nothing more than his own labor. One should study only those scriptures that glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his transcendental pastimes, and that contain narrations of his various incarnations. Because whatever we study, see, it's not only we eat through the mouth, but when we study, we are eating too. So we got to be very careful what we study. By doing so, one gains the highest good fortune, whereas by studying scriptures other than these, one simply acquires misfortune. So let's stop it here. There's a one more page of this summary, so we'll just read it slowly next week. And then we'll go through verse by verse the answers given by Lord Krishna in order to clarify it for us also, for Uddhava also. So we'll start with the page number 147 and verse number 1. But before we go into the text, we'll definitely finish this summary also. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you very much for coming.